He told me I had to leave because his wife said I smell like old people.
My true story from Arkansas. You can't live here anymore, Mama, my son said, not even looking at me as he fidgeted with his phone. Ava says you make the house smell like old people. He said it soft, like maybe I would notice. But I did. Ava, my new daughter-in-law, stood behind him in the kitchen, arms folded tight over her chest. Her perfect red nails clicked on the countertop. I just can't stand it, Walter. The furniture, her clothes, everything. I'm sorry, but I can't live like this. Her words stung like fresh soap in an old cut. I am Mary Louise Thomas. I turned 71 last spring, the day after Ava and Walter married. I worked as a nurse for most of my life, 34 years at the county hospital, 3 children, 2 now gone to heaven. My husband, Henry, passed 5 years ago. That left just me and Walter in our old yellow house. At least, until the wedding. Walter was my youngest, my only boy. He'd always been gentle, sweet, the type to bring home stray dogs and little birds fallen from their nests. I'd never seen him this way, cold, distant, as if I'd become another piece of furniture he no longer needed. That morning, he wouldn't even look me in the eye. It's just too much for Ava. She needs her space. And we're trying to start a family. Maybe you'd be happier somewhere quieter. Somewhere quieter. Like the old folks' home on Pine Street, where all the lights go out at 8, and the air smells like boiled cabbage and loneliness. Ava smiled, thin and triumphant, her gaze sweeping over my small suitcase, already packed, though I hadn't told anyone. I could see the relief in her eyes, as if my leaving was just another step in her plan. I opened my mouth to protest, but the words stuck. My throat felt thick. My eyes stung. In 60 years, no one had ever told me I smelled wrong. I nodded. If that's what you want, Walter. I'll be gone by evening. For a second, just a flicker, I thought he might change his mind. But then Ava slipped her arm around his waist, pulling him toward the new kitchen table she'd picked out and paid for. They sat side by side, their laughter echoing as I carried my suitcase out. The sun was warm on my back, but I felt cold all the way through. Each step to the porch was heavier than the last. My slippers made soft little shuffles across the boards, hardly the footsteps of someone you'd call loud or bothersome. I left my keys on the hook by the door, the way Henry always did. Out on the sidewalk, I paused. The lilac bush Walter and I planted years ago was blooming, purple and wild. I bent to smell it, but all I could taste was regret. I made my way down Main Street, the world feeling too bright, too fast. I wondered if everyone could see I'd just lost my home, my family. The mailbox still had my name, M.L. Thomas, painted on by Walter when he was 10. I let my fingers brush the letters, just once. At the bus stop, Mrs. Calvin from church nodded politely. Everything all right, Mary? I nodded. What could I say? That I'd been ousted for being too old, too familiar? That my own son had turned his back on me? No, some things are better left unsaid. I ended up at the Pine Street home after all. The place I swore I'd never set foot in unless it was feet first. The nurse at the desk was kind, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. We've got a room on the 2nd floor, Mary. Sunlight in the mornings.
She meant well.
I unpacked my suitcase, lined up my pictures on the windowsill. Henry's smile. The kids in their Easter best. My old life, trapped in silver frames. The first night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant shuffle of slippers and the soft coughs from other rooms. I thought about Walter and Ava, their laughter, the clean smell of new paint. How quickly you become an inconvenience. But I am not weak. Age does not mean emptiness. I remembered my own mother's words. Silence is not surrender, Mary. Sometimes it's the loudest thing you can do. The next morning, I got up early. I washed my face, put on my best cardigan, and walked down to breakfast with my head high. I started to notice things. The way Mrs. Parson always sat alone. How Mr. Evans never touched his eggs. The way the staff seemed tired, stretched thin. In those first days, I felt invisible. But sometimes, Being unseen is a kind of freedom. I watched, I listened, and I began to make plans, quiet plans. My revenge would not be loud or cruel. It would be patient, careful, and just. Walter and Ava thought they'd gotten rid of me, but they didn't know what I still had to offer or how deeply a mother can shape the world around her, even from the shadows. Let them enjoy their new beginning. My ending was still being written, and it would be a lesson they'd never forget. The morning sun glinted through the window of my new room at Pine Street home, drawing bright lines across the faded floral bedspread. I blinked against the light, forcing myself to move even as my bones creaked in protest. This was my world now, a small room, a narrow bed, the view of a cracked parking lot, and a half-dead maple tree. I refused to let the four walls close in on me. At breakfast, the dining hall buzzed with the low, constant hum of old stories and creaking chairs. I noticed right away who talked and who didn't. Mrs. Parson always sat at the end table, buttering her toast but never eating it. Mr. Evans, with his cane and pressed shirt, shuffled in 10 minutes late every morning, quietly nodding to the staff but never to any of us. Some of the others, the ones with bright eyes and sharp memories, stuck together, but most kept to themselves. Loneliness hung over the room like a blanket nobody wanted but couldn't shake off. I sat at a table by the window and tried to eat my oatmeal. It tasted like cardboard. Across from me, a tiny woman with snowy white hair and a faded pink sweater picked at her food. She glanced up, her eyes meeting mine. "You new here?" she asked in a whisper. I nodded. "Name's Mary." She smiled, showing a single gold tooth. "Ruth. Been here 4 years. You'll get used to it, or you won't. Either way, no one much cares." She laughed, a dry little sound. "What brought you here?" For a second, I thought about telling her the truth. About Walter and Ava, about the words that still echoed in my head. "You smell like old people." But I just said, "Family changes. Sometimes you need a new start." She patted my hand with her frail fingers. "We all got stories. Sometimes it helps to share." The rest of the morning I tried to keep busy. I walked the halls, peered at the faded photos on the walls, people who'd once lived here, smiling for birthdays and Christmas parties that had long since faded into memory. I thought about Walter and Ava, probably rearranging my old house, tossing out my curtains and cushions, maybe even repainting the walls. I wondered if they'd thrown away the quilt I'd made for Walter when he turned 18, each square stitched with love and hope for a future I'd never see. I wandered outside after lunch, sitting on a rusted bench under the maple tree. The air was thick and hot, but it smelled like grass and earth, better than any scented candle Ava ever bought. I closed my eyes, listening to birds in the distance. That's when I heard the voices. "You see the new lady? Mary, I think her name is. Fresh meat." One of the aides joked, her voice sharp and careless. "Give her a week. She'll be just like the rest." I opened my eyes but didn't turn around. Let them talk. I'd spent a lifetime being overlooked, dismissed, but I'd also learned to listen. People say the most important things when they think you're not paying attention. I went back inside and found Ruth in the activity room, doing a puzzle with shaky hands. "Do you ever feel like you're invisible here?" I asked. She laughed again, soft and sad. "Every day, Mary. It's how they like us, quiet, out of the way." That night, I lay awake, thinking of all the ways I'd been quiet. Raising children, tending to Henry, working double shifts at the hospital, always putting myself last. And now, this was my reward, a room that wasn't really mine, surrounded by people who'd been forgotten by everyone except each other. I could have let myself slip away, faded into the wallpaper. But as the clock ticked past midnight, I felt a spark inside me, a stubborn ember that refused to die out. Maybe I couldn't make Walter and Ava love me again, but I could make a difference here. I could show them and myself that age does not mean weakness. Quiet does not mean surrender. The next morning, I made up my mind. I started small. I helped Mrs. Parson open her jam jar at breakfast, listened to Mr. Evans complain about his knees, and walked with Ruth to the garden, even though my own legs ached. When the staff was short-handed, I volunteered to help pour coffee and set the tables. Some of the other residents noticed. "Thank you, Mary," they'd say, and the words meant more to me than any apology from Walter ever could. A week passed. My room felt less like a prison and more like a haven. I put fresh lilacs on my windowsill, cut from the bush outside. I hummed while I dusted my dresser, remembered old hymns my mother used to sing. People started coming to me for help, for comfort. They called me Nurse Mary again, just like the old days. But the ache for my son never faded. Sometimes I'd see a young man walking down the hall, maybe a volunteer, maybe someone's grandson, and my heart would skip, hoping it was Walter come to see me. He never did. The only thing I got from him was a text, short and to the point. "Hope you're settling in, Mom. Ava says hi." No phone call. No visit. Just those empty words, colder than the hospital basement in January. At Pine Street, I began to notice the cracks in the way things were run. Medicine carts left unlocked. Residents forgotten during activities. I saw how the staff sometimes snapped at those who moved too slowly or spilled their food. One afternoon, I found Mrs. Lacey in tears because her lunch tray was taken before she'd finished. The nurse in me woke up, angry and alert. I started writing things down in a little notebook. Missed pills, bruises with no explanation, names of aides who were gentle and those who were not. I was quiet, always smiling, always polite. But I was watching. Word got around that Mary was someone you could trust. The other residents opened up to me, told me things they'd never dared before. I listened, nodding, taking notes in my head. In the evenings, I'd sit by my window, thinking about how I could help, how I could be more than a forgotten old woman. One night, as rain pattered against the glass, Ruth knocked on my door. "Mary, you need to see this," she whispered. She led me down the hall to Mr. Evans' room. He was sitting on his bed, clutching his chest, his breathing ragged. "They forgot my heart pills again," he managed to say, voice trembling. I hurried to the nurse's station, my anger burning hot. "He needs his medication now," I demanded. The aide on duty glared at me. "Mind your own business." I didn't back down. I called for the head nurse, reported everything I'd seen. That night, I stayed by Mr. Evans' side until he was stable. He gripped my hand, eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Mary. You saved my life." The next morning, the head nurse called me into her office. "You've been busy," she said, her voice neutral. "I'm just doing what I know is right," I replied. She studied me, then nodded. "We need more people like you here." After that, things started to change. The staff became more careful, more attentive. Some resented me, but others thanked me quietly in the halls. The residents began to speak up for themselves, their voices growing stronger each day. Through all of it, I thought of Walter and Ava, living their perfect, silent life in my old house, never knowing that I was fighting back in my own way. My revenge was not loud or cruel. It was a quiet strength, a whisper that became a wave. And so, in the stillness of my new world, I began to find purpose again. I was not finished, not by a long shot. My story was just beginning, and I was determined to make sure no one ever overlooked me, or anyone like me, again. Mornings at Pine Street home began with the clang of breakfast trays and the rattle of medicine carts. The world felt slower here, as if time itself tiptoed out of respect for our frail bodies and stubborn hearts. I fell into the rhythm, waking before dawn, brushing my thinning hair, and pressing the same blue cardigan each day. I carried my notebook in my pocket like a badge. But even as I found a place among these weathered souls, I couldn't stop thinking about Walter and Ava. At night, as the building settled with the sighs and creaks of age, I would lie awake replaying every moment. The words hurt as fresh as the first day. "You smell like old people." How quickly a life could be rewritten. How easy it was to become the punchline of someone else's story. But I refused to be pitted. I would not let bitterness gnaw through my bones. Instead, I let my silence gather strength. Each day, I found new ways to make myself useful. I ran the early morning coffee for the night shift nurses, careful to remember who took cream and who liked sugar. I made myself available, mending a button, holding a trembling hand, telling stories when the storms outside grew too loud for sleep. I watched the other residents, learning their patterns and hurts. Mrs. Parsons still wouldn't eat, so I began bringing her apple slices I tucked away from lunch. I listened to Mr. Evans rant about the youngsters these days, and let him win at dominoes when no one else would play. Ruth became my shadow, teaching me the ins and outs of Pine Street, how to avoid the cold spots in the hallway, how to charm the cook into slipping you a second helping of peach cobbler. A month went by. I wrote long letters to Walter, sometimes tearing them up, sometimes mailing them, but never receiving a reply. Ava sent a single thank you card for a wedding gift, her words stilted and formal. No phone calls. No visits. My name on their lips only in complaint, if at all. One Sunday, Pine Street held a family day. Banners hung over the entrance, and children's laughter filled the yard. I watched as residents welcomed sons and daughters, grandchildren clutching homemade cards and flowers. My own spot at the table remained empty, but I smiled anyway, playing hostess to those who had no visitors. Mrs. Parsons' daughter came, bringing perfume and soft socks. Mr. Evans' son wheeled him out to the garden, speaking in slow, careful sentences. Ruth's granddaughter painted her nails and told her stories about college boys. I watched them, bittersweet pride and envy tangled in my heart. After the crowd faded, I wandered out to the garden and sat in the fading sun, hands folded in my lap. I remembered Walter as a boy, muddy shoes and gap-toothed grin, always running to me with treasures, bird feathers, pretty stones, stories of kindness he'd done. I wondered how that boy had become the man who turned me away for smelling old. "Penny for your thoughts?" Ruth said, lowering herself beside me on the bench. I gave her a tired smile. "Just thinking about family." She patted my knee. "We're family here, Mary. You belong." I felt it then, a stubborn kind of hope, slow but certain. If Walter and Ava wanted a life without me, that was their choice. But I would not disappear. I would not waste what years I had left on anger or regret. The staff at Pine Street, still wary for my earlier complaints, now tiptoed around me. Some thanked me for helping, others avoided my gaze, but a few, like Olivia, a young nurse with tired eyes and a soft voice, sought me out for advice. One afternoon, Olivia pulled me aside as I was folding laundry. "Mary, do you mind talking to Mrs. Lacey? She's been so sad lately. She won't eat or leave her room." I nodded, slipping a piece of chocolate into my pocket. I knocked on Mrs. Lacey's door and entered the gloom of her room. The old woman sat on her bed, staring at a faded photograph. I sat beside her, quiet at first. "Who's that?" I asked, pointing to the picture. She blinked, tears slipping down her cheeks. "My son. He stopped visiting after I moved here." My heart twisted. "Mine too," I whispered. "But you know what? We're still here. That means something." I sat with her until the tears dried, then coaxed her into the sunlit hallway. I offered her the chocolate, and she smiled for the first time since I arrived. News of my miracle work spread, and soon more staff asked for help. I found purpose in these small acts of kindness. I organized reading circles, started a petition for better meals, and even convinced the director to let us plant a vegetable garden in the back lot. The residents bloomed with me, their voices louder, their smiles more frequent. Even the aides grew gentler, more patient. But my revenge, my real revenge, waited quietly in the wings. I knew Pine Street had its secrets. I watched and listened, filling my notebook with dates and names. I overheard staff gossip about a new government inspection, about complaints mysteriously disappearing. When I asked questions, I was brushed off with patronizing smiles. But I'd been a nurse too long to miss the truth. Some residents didn't get the care they deserved. Some medications went missing. I called the ombudsman's number one night, my voice shaking but clear. "You need to visit Pine Street Home," I said. "Things aren't right here. I'll be waiting for you." It was a risk, one that might make me a target or an outcast. But I remembered my mother's words, "Silence is not surrender." When the inspection came, I helped gather the other residents, urging them to speak their truth. "They won't listen if we stay quiet," I said. "But together, we're stronger than they know." For the first time in years, I felt powerful, not because I shouted, but because I stood with quiet strength. I would show Walter and Ava, and anyone who doubted the power of memory and dignity, that revenge can whisper instead of scream. And in that whisper, I began to find my voice again. The day of the inspection arrived on a sharp breeze, bringing with it a nervous energy that crackled through Pine Street home like a coming storm. Staff members straightened uniforms and whispered urgently in corners. Residents watched with wide eyes, some anxious, some hopeful. I waited, my notebook heavy in my cardigan pocket, my resolve sharper than it had been in years. The inspectors wore dark suits and polite smiles. They introduced themselves to the director first, shaking hands with a kind of empty warmth that only outsiders could muster. I saw Olivia standing near the supply closet, knuckles white around her clipboard. She glanced at me, worry flickering in her eyes. When the inspectors finally turned their attention to us, the residents, they sat in the common room and invited anyone to speak. At first, there was only silence. Fear is a powerful thing, especially when you're old and you rely on others for every meal, every bath, every scrap of dignity. I took a breath and stood. "My name is Mary Louise Thomas," I said, keeping my voice steady and kind. "I was a nurse for 34 years. I know the difference between compassion and convenience. We have good people here, but we are overlooked. Our medicines go missing. Our meals are rushed. Some of us have gone weeks without seeing daylight." A hush settled over the room. I saw Ruth nodding beside me, her hands trembling but determined. "That's true," she whispered, barely loud enough to be heard. "And they yell sometimes, too." The floodgates opened. Mr. Evans, always so proud, cleared his throat and spoke about the time his call button went unanswered for hours. Mrs. Parson finally admitted she'd been afraid to eat because of the way an aide had snapped at her. Others found their courage in our honesty, and soon the room was full of voices. Old voices, trembling but powerful, refusing to be ignored any longer. The staff looked away. Some glared. A few, like Olivia, seemed relieved. The inspectors scribbled furiously in their notebooks, asking gentle questions, promising to look into everything. For days after, the mood at Pine Street shifted. The director posted new signs in the halls. Staff members became almost too attentive, bending over backward to keep us comfortable. For some, it was all for show. But for many, it was a real chance to do better. I became something of a leader after that. Residents sought me out for advice, for comfort, for the courage to stand up for themselves. Ruth liked to joke that I was our unofficial mayor. The aides gave me wide berth, but a few even started to call me Miss Mary, with something like respect. Evenings, I would sit in my room and watch the world outside. The maple tree, with its tired limbs, still managed to bud and grow. I saw my own life reflected in it, scarred, yes, but not done living. Still, there was an ache that wouldn't leave. I missed my old house, the rhythm of my days with Walter, the feeling of being needed in ways only a mother knows. Sometimes I allowed myself to imagine knocking on their door, to see the look of surprise, maybe even regret, on Ava's perfect face. But that wasn't my way. My revenge had to be quieter, deeper, and longer-lasting than a single confrontation. The next family day, a month after the inspection, I received a card in the mail. The envelope was pale blue, the handwriting careful and round. Walter's. My heart hammered as I opened it. "Mom, hope you're well. Ava's parents are visiting next week, and she's busy with work. Things are a bit hectic. Sorry I haven't called. Maybe we can talk soon? Walter." I stared at those words, reading them over and over. No mention of missing me. No apology. Just the dull business of a new life, already settled and sealed. I slipped the card into my drawer and wrote no reply. Instead, I poured my heart into helping others here. I started a memory club, where residents shared stories every Wednesday after lunch. I taught the night nurse how to comfort Mrs. Lacey during her panic attacks, and I helped the kitchen staff plan a menu that included our favorite dishes from home. It was a small rebellion, refusing to become invisible, refusing to accept less than what we deserved. The best revenge, I realized, was living well, to show Walter and Ava, even from a distance, that I was still me, strong, resourceful, and loved by many, even if not by them. My life would not shrink to fit their narrow expectations. One evening, Olivia caught me in the hallway as I walked Ruth back to her room. "Miss Mary," she said, "I just wanted to thank you. Things are different around here now, and that's because of you." I smiled at her, that ember of pride glowing warmer in my chest. "Thank you, Olivia. We're all stronger than we look." As I turned out Ruth's light and sat in the soft hush of her room, I thought of all the ways I'd been told to be quiet over the years. But in my silence, I'd built something lasting. My revenge was already working, a ripple of change that would touch more lives than Walter or Ava could ever know. In the dark, I whispered to myself, "Silence is not surrender. It is the patient strength of memory. It is the power to outlast and outlove." And I was just getting started. As spring ripened into summer, Pine Street home began to feel less like exile and more like a place I belonged. There was comfort in our routines, the way Ruth would wait for me by the garden each afternoon, or how Mr. Evans insisted I deal his dominoes because I shuffled fair. The aides checked on me with wary respect. Residents began calling me just to talk, share secrets, or sometimes just sit in the quiet. In all the years of my old house, I'd never felt needed quite like this. Yet, not a day passed without the memory of Walter's words echoing through me. "Ava says you smell like old people." I would see him in my mind, standing in our kitchen, avoiding my eyes, while Ava's smile curled sharp as barbed wire. For a while, I wished the ache would fade, but it never did. Instead, it changed less like a wound, more like a scar. I was healing, but I would never forget. I poured my energy into the home, not as a way to forget, but to remember who I was. I found out the county library sent books to care homes, so I started a lending circle and took charge of the sign-out sheet. I taught Olivia and 2 other aides how to turn bath time into a spa hour, complete with lavender oil and music. The director, seeing the shift in morale, asked if I'd consider running an orientation for new hires. "Why not?" I said with a smile. "Some things can only be learned from experience." The residents, once so quiet and faded, grew bold with me. I encouraged them to speak out, to file complaints, to request what they needed. Some said I was stirring up trouble, but most thanked me for helping them remember that their voices still mattered. I began writing my own story, pages filled with memories from my nursing days, my childhood on the farm, raising Walter and his sisters, and all the small rebellions that made a life worth living. I wrote about Henry's last days, the way we danced to old records when the pain let him, how he always told me, "Don't you dare shrink for anyone, Mary Louise." I wrote about Walter too, about the boy he was and the man he became, and the heartbreak that lingered between us. Ava's name was never far from my mind. Sometimes, I caught myself wondering if she'd ever truly loved Walter, or just the idea of a new life without strings or history. I wondered what she'd say if she saw me now, sitting at the center of this bustling little world, respected and relied upon. One humid afternoon, as I was reading on the porch, a familiar car pulled into the parking lot. My heart thudded, unwilling to hope. Walter stepped out alone. He wore his work clothes, creased khakis, collared shirt, his hair mussed in the July heat. He moved slowly, as if unsure. I waited on the bench as he approached, watching his hands fidget with the keys in his pocket. He stopped before me, eyes downcast. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. I thought I'd come see how you were doing." I looked at him. Really looked, the way only a mother can. I saw lines of worry and fatigue that hadn't been there before. "Sit down, Walter." He did, and for a moment, we were both silent. Birds sang in the trees. I watched his eyes flicker toward the garden, the tables of residents playing cards and sipping sweet tea. He cleared his throat. "I know I haven't called. Things have been complicated at home. I nodded, but said nothing. I could feel the words he wanted to say hovering in the air, just out of reach. He tried again. Ava's not happy. She thought things would be different. She says I'm too attached to the past. He laughed, a brittle sound. She redecorated the whole house. Got rid of just about everything. Said we needed a fresh start. I kept my hands folded, my voice gentle. And, do you feel fresh, Walter? He shook his head, staring at his shoes. I feel lonely. I miss home. I miss you. I didn't realize how much until you were gone. For a moment, my heart squeezed tight with old longing, but I wouldn't let it take me. I had learned too much about being overlooked and underestimated to surrender to guilt. I leaned closer. Sometimes, son, people throw away things they need most because they're afraid to face the truth. Ava didn't want to see what family really meant, and you let her. He winced. I know. I'm sorry, Mom. I should never have let you go. His apology, years too late, hung in the warm air. I let it sit, knowing that forgiveness does not have to mean forgetting. You can't change the past, Walter, but you can decide what kind of man you want to be now. He looked at me then, searching for the mother who'd always forgiven, always made things right. I gave him a tired smile. It's never too late to start over, but you have to do it for yourself, not for anyone else. We sat together in silence, the afternoon sliding by. Ruth waved from her garden chair, and Walter lifted a hand in shy greeting. Eventually, he stood uncertain. Can I come back and visit? Maybe bring you some of your things. I nodded. If you want to visit, you're always welcome. But don't bring me anything from the past. I have what I need. He blinked, confused, then nodded, squeezing my hand. I'll see you soon, Mom. I watched him go, feeling lighter and heavier all at once. I had waited for his apology, but now I realized I didn't need it. My life had grown beyond the small world he and Ava had shut me out of. My revenge was not in making them suffer, but in refusing to let their cruelty define my worth. That night, as rain pattered against my window, I wrote in my journal, age does not mean weakness. Silence does not mean surrender. The strongest revenge is living well and loving deeply, even when the world tells you to shrink. The world had tried to erase me, but I had become impossible to overlook. Summer melted into golden autumn. The maple outside my window turned flame red, shedding its leaves with a kind of quiet dignity I had come to respect. Life at Pine Street Home had changed, not just for me, but for everyone. The garden was thriving. Our reading circle had grown to include half the residents, and the director's weekly rounds now included real conversations instead of empty smiles. People noticed us, listened to us. I saw the proof every day in the way residents spoke up, in the way staff lingered to chat, in the new pictures of happy faces hung in the halls. But as I helped Pine Street find its voice, Walter's apology and his rare visits hung over me like unfinished business. He came twice in September, always alone, bringing a quiet sadness with him. He never spoke of Ava, and I didn't ask. He would sit with me in the garden, his hands restless. We talked of the weather, of my garden tomatoes, of the football team he'd loved as a boy. Each visit, he lingered a little longer, left with a little less guilt in his eyes. I could see the man he was growing into, gentler, maybe wiser, marked by loss. Still, he was my son. One evening as the leaves turned, he arrived with a bag of apples and a letter in his hand. It's from Ava, he said, his voice tight. She wanted you to have it. I took the envelope, my hand steady even as my heart sped up. The letter was short and neat, every word controlled. Mary, I'm sorry for the way things turned out. I didn't understand what it would mean to have you in our home, and I thought a fresh start meant less history, less weight. But I see now that I was wrong. Walter misses you, and I realize I took something important from him, and from you. I hope you find peace where you are. Thank you for raising the man I love.
Ava.
I folded the letter and set it in my lap. I felt no triumph, only a kind of quiet relief. Ava would never be my daughter in any true sense, but she had given me what I needed, admission that what she'd done had consequences. It was not love, but it was truth. Walter sat beside me, watching my face. "I know it's not enough," he said, "but I hope it helps." I reached for his hand. Sometimes the hardest thing is admitting when we're wrong. She did it. And so did you. I squeezed his fingers, soft and wrinkled, still strong. You can both move on now. So can I. That night, I let myself grieve. For my old house, for the family I'd lost, for all the years I'd spent hoping to be seen and cherished. The tears came quietly, soaking my pillow. But when morning came, I felt lighter. There was no more anger to carry. In the following weeks, I set about making the biggest change yet at Pine Street. With the director's blessing, I started a volunteer program, inviting local high school students and church members to visit, read to residents, help with crafts, share music. The halls, once silent and somber, rang with laughter and voices young and old. I watched the residents blossom under the attention, watched the staff grow prouder of their work. Even Olivia, who once hid her exhaustion behind a mask of professionalism, found new joy in her work. "You did this, Mary," she said one afternoon as we sat with Ruth, shelling peas for supper. "You made this place feel alive." I shook my head, smiling. We all did. Sometimes all it takes is a little push, and someone willing to stand up, quietly but firmly. I began to receive letters from other homes, other elders, asking for advice. I wrote back to each one, sharing what I'd learned. Don't be afraid to speak up. Your voice matters no matter how old you are. The world is listening, even when it pretends not to. For the first time since leaving my house, I found myself looking forward to each day. I had created something lasting, something that would remain even after I was gone. Walter's visits continued, always quiet, sometimes hopeful. On one visit, he brought news. "Ava and I were separating. It's for the best, Mom. She needs things I can't give. I need to remember who I am." I hugged him, both of us crying, but for different reasons. I was proud of him, of myself, of the way we had both survived the breaking and built something better from the pieces. As winter crept in, I sat by the window, the world outside gone white and still. Ruth sat beside me, her hand in mine. We watched the snow fall, silent and steady. "Did you ever imagine your life would turn out this way?" Ruth asked. I smiled at her, my heart finally peaceful. "No, but I wouldn't change it. Sometimes, Ruth, revenge isn't about hurting those who hurt you. Sometimes it's about living so well that your absence becomes the thing they regret most." She squeezed my hand, and we sat in silence, listening to the world whisper its secrets. Snow gathered along the sills and dusted the old maple's bare branches, turning Pine Street into a world of pale blue and soft silence. The residents wore thick sweaters and traded stories over steaming cups of tea. Holiday wreaths appeared on doors, and every evening, the halls echoed with carols sung by children from the local church. For the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever: belonging. My role at Pine Street had become bigger than I'd ever imagined. The volunteer program thrived, bringing new faces each week, students reading aloud, musicians playing in the common room, Girl Scouts with paper snowflakes and cookies. Even the director's cold professionalism thawed a little. She asked my advice before changes were made, invited me to speak at staff meetings, and let me host a small memory hour each Sunday where the old ones told stories and the young ones listened. I saw myself in so many of the residents, those who had been pushed aside by families, told they were burdens, their value measured only in their silence. But here, we raised our voices together. Here, every story mattered. Walter came most weekends now. He brought groceries, sometimes a pie, sometimes nothing but himself and a new humility that made my heart ache with pride and sorrow. His divorce from Ava was quiet, dignified. She moved back to her parents, and Walter rented a small apartment nearby. Sometimes he looked tired, defeated, but sometimes when we walked in the snowy garden, He looked almost like the boy I remembered. One gray morning, Walter brought his boss to Pine Street. "Mom, Mr. Sanders wants to see what you've done here," he said, his voice hesitant but hopeful. Mr. Sanders, a stout man with a warm handshake, walked the halls with me. He listened as I described the changes, the new programs, the advocacy, the way residents had come alive with purpose. "I never thought a care home could feel like this," he admitted. "You've made something special, Mary." I nodded, modest. We all did. Sometimes all it takes is a little kindness and a stubborn refusal to be overlooked. He looked thoughtful. "Would you ever consider speaking at our company's next meeting? Share your story, maybe help us improve our other facilities." I felt my cheeks warm. "I've never been one for speeches, Mr. Sanders. But if my story helps even one person, I'll do it." That night, I lay in bed remembering my first days at Pine Street. The pain, the humiliation, the way Walter and Ava's rejection had carved a hole in my heart. I thought about how easily I could have disappeared into silence, how many people had expected me to simply vanish, to become invisible and compliant. But I hadn't. My revenge, gentle, patient, and unrelenting, was this: to build something lasting, to find family where none was left, to refuse to let my voice be stolen. It was poetic, really, how my exile had become my freedom. Walter's absence had been his own loss. Ava's hunger for a life without me had left her empty. Meanwhile, my life overflowed, with purpose, with laughter, with a kind of love I never expected to find so late in life. Winter passed, and as the days grew longer, the maple outside my window budded with hope. I watched children chase each other in the thawing yard, watched my friends gather for our memory hour, watched Walter walk up the path every Sunday with a smile just for me. One afternoon, as we sat together in the sunlit common room, Walter took my hand in both of his. "Mom, I want to thank you for forgiving me, for building all this, for teaching me what it really means to start over." I squeezed his hand, tears burning but unfallen. "You don't have to thank me, Walter. Just live your life with kindness. That's all the thanks I'll ever need." As the sun slipped low and the residents gathered for supper, I felt a profound peace settle over me, a knowing that my quiet strength had been enough. The world would always overlook the old and the silent, but I had learned the greatest lesson, that revenge, when it whispers instead of screams, can remake everything it touches. And in that whisper, I was finally heard. Spring arrived in Arkansas with soft rains and the perfume of wild lilac drifting through the open windows of Pine Street home. I watched the world turn green again from my seat beneath the old maple tree, my hands resting on the arms of the bench that had become my own little pulpit. All winter, I'd told myself my story was nearly finished, but each new sunrise reminded me that a new page was always waiting. Walter was there most weekends. Our visits had found their easy rhythm. No talk of the past unless he brought it up. No apology demanded or expected, just the sharing of everyday things. He helped me tend the vegetable beds with the other residents. He listened when I told him about Ruth's new great-grandchild, or about Mrs. Parson finally eating a whole sandwich after all these months. We laughed about the memory hour, turning into a neighborhood event, with visitors squeezing into every available seat, eager for a taste of our stories. One Sunday, Pine Street held an open house, inviting families and the community to see all that had changed. The halls were filled with laughter and the smell of fresh bread. I stood near the entrance, greeting everyone, my cardigan as blue as the Arkansas sky. Walter hovered nearby, half proud and half nervous, watching as people came to shake my hand or ask how they could help. A local reporter showed up with a camera and a notepad. She asked about my role at Pine Street, and I told her, I just did what I knew was right. Sometimes people think being quiet means you have nothing to say, but I think it means you're listening and planning. The article that followed ran in the city paper, titled, "Nurse Who Wouldn't Be Silenced Changes Life at Pine Street." It brought donations, new volunteers, and even more visitors. The director called me into her office one afternoon. "Mary, we'd like to create a permanent memory garden out back and name it after you. Would you allow that?" I smiled, touched to my very core. Only if everyone who lives here gets to plant something. The project brought everyone together. Residents and families turned the soil, planted flowers and herbs, built benches and bird feeders. Even Ruth, frail as she was, insisted on planting a single rose bush. On the day the plaque was unveiled, the Mary Louise Thomas Memory Garden, Walter stood beside me, tears shining in his eyes. "Mom, you did all this." I shook my head. "We did this. No one does anything alone, Walter."
Not really.
The garden flourished, and so did Pine Street. New programs began: story circles, intergenerational craft days, music nights. I was asked to speak at other homes, even to train staff at hospitals. At first, the thought of it frightened me. I was just one old woman, cast aside for being too much like the past. But I went, carrying my story, my silence, and my stubborn hope. One summer evening, I sat in the garden as the sun set, Ruth on one side and Walter on the other. The air buzzed with crickets, and the laughter of the residents drifted on the breeze. "Do you ever wish things had happened differently?" Walter asked, not quite meeting my eyes. I thought for a long time before answering. "I used to, son. But not anymore. If I hadn't been forced out, I might never have found what I was truly meant to do. I might never have learned how strong I really am." He squeezed my hand, and I felt his apology in the warmth of his touch. The greatest revenge, I realized, wasn't hurting those who'd hurt me. It was refusing to let their cruelty shrink my life. It was growing, loving, building something new, something no one could take away. Silence is not surrender, I told Walter and Ruth. Age does not mean weakness. Sometimes, the quietest voices carry the most truth. The world may have tried to overlook me, to erase me with the label of old. But in the end, my story was written in gardens and friendships, in laughter and whispered memories. If my story spoke to your heart, share it. If you know someone who feels forgotten, tell them. Silence is not surrender, and age does not mean you have nothing left to give. And if you believe in quiet revenge, in the power of gentle strength, then subscribe and stay for the next story, because the world is full of voices just waiting to be heard. The season spun on. By late summer, the memory garden was a riot of color: daisies, marigolds, Ruth's stubborn rose, and the old bench now half covered in trailing morning glories. Pine Street no longer felt like an ending place, but a new beginning. More families chose us for their loved ones, drawn by the laughter echoing from the halls, the smell of home-baked bread, and the promise that here, no one would be invisible. Each morning, I walked the garden paths, checking for weeds and gathering stories. The other residents joined me, one by one, some for the fresh air, others for company, all of us for hope. Ruth carried her cane like a scepter and ordered the volunteers around, declaring, "This is Mary's garden, but we're all the roots." Her pride in our little revolution was contagious. With the garden thriving, my revenge grew deeper, more profound. There was a power in quietly refusing to be erased, a power in the life we built, in the way the world outside began to pay attention. The staff, once hurried and distant, now competed to help with our projects. The local high school sent more volunteers than we could use. The director asked if I'd help write a welcome handbook for new residents. I poured into it every lesson I'd learned about respect, memory, and how silence can sometimes shake the walls louder than any scream. News spread further than I ever dreamed. I was invited to speak at an elder advocacy summit in Little Rock. Standing before a room of strangers, my voice shook at first, but Ruth's words echoed in my mind. "We're all the roots," and I told my story. I spoke about being cast aside, about finding purpose and dignity in the place no one expects. I shared how a quiet act of resistance, helping a neighbor, planting a seed, speaking the truth, could ripple outward and change a community. By the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. After my talk, people lined up to thank me. One woman, with silver hair and the same tired ache in her eyes that I'd seen in my mirror 100 times, hugged me and whispered, "You gave me hope." That was the real revenge. knowing I had become the hand I wished someone had offered me. Meanwhile, Walter's life shifted in quiet, slow turns. He got promoted at work and started joining me at Pine Street to volunteer on weekends, helping the residents fix up the old tool shed or organize books in the reading room. There was no talk of Ava, her absence no longer an ache, just a fact. Walter seemed lighter, his laughter easier, as if he'd finally forgiven himself. One Sunday, Walter brought a cake for the garden party, his specialty since childhood. As we served it to the residents and their families, I felt the ache of old wounds replaced by pride. Walter stood beside me, steady and present, and I saw in him not the boy I'd lost, but the man he'd become, kind, resilient, capable of learning from pain. On that day, I finally let go of every bitter feeling. I realized that forgiveness, real, honest forgiveness, was not something I owed Walter or Ava. It was a gift I gave myself, a way to clear the last shadow from my own heart. As the sun set over the Arkansas hills, I sat in my garden, surrounded by voices and laughter, and I knew I'd won. Not with anger, not with cruelty, but with a legacy of love and courage. If the world overlooks you, let your roots grow deeper. Whisper your story, and let the truth bloom. The garden stood at its peak, a wild testament to all we'd built. Bees drifted between blossoms, and sunlight pooled in golden puddles along the paths. When I sat beneath the old maple now, it was never alone. Ruth and the others found me there, trading stories or simply sitting in the comfort of company. Walter, more present than I ever could have dreamed, came each Sunday, sleeves rolled up, ready to work alongside us. Some afternoons, when Pine Street's halls were quiet, I'd pause by the new plaque in the memory garden. My name was there, but I always read the last line first, planted by friends, grown by hope. That was what my revenge had become. Not a sharp blade, but a gentle hand that lifted others up, until even the world outside our walls could not ignore us. Letters came from as far as Texas and Mississippi. Strangers sent photos of their own little gardens, started in honor of the nurse from Arkansas who wouldn't be silenced. A group of volunteers began calling themselves the Whisperers, in tribute to our motto, revenge that whispers instead of screams. The day I turned 73, the staff held a party in the garden. Children sang, residents toasted with sweet tea, and Walter baked a peach cobbler just like his father used to make. When the director hugged me, I wept, not for what I had lost, but for all that had been found. Walter pulled me aside as the party faded into the warm dusk. "You know, Mom," he said, his voice raw with emotion, "I used to think you were just stubborn. I never realized how strong you were, or how much I needed to learn from you." I took his hands in mine, hands that had once clung to me as a child, now calloused with the work of regret and new beginnings. We all learn, Walter. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the quiet ones. Sometimes the world overlooks what it most needs. He nodded, tears shining. "I'm sorry it took me so long." I smiled. "I'm not. If I hadn't been pushed out, I might never have found my purpose. And neither would you." That evening, I walked the garden paths alone one last time. I thought of the old house I'd left behind, of Ava's cold words, "You smell like old people." I remembered the pain of being made invisible, of packing my life into a single suitcase. But I also remembered the day I stood up in the common room, how my voice found its power, and how others' voices rose with mine. My revenge had bloomed, not in bitterness, but in the stubborn grace of refusing to be erased. As the sun set, I sat on the bench under the maple, watching petals drift and the shadows stretch long. Ruth found me there, settling beside me with her gentle smile. "Do you ever regret staying quiet all those years?" she asked. I took a breath, the air sweet with lilac and memory. "Not anymore, Ruth. Because silence is not surrender. Age does not mean weakness. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is keep growing, quietly, fiercely, until even those who overlooked you have to see what you've become." If my story spoke to your heart, please share it. If you have ever felt invisible, remember, your silence holds power, your memories are roots, and your gentle strength can change the world. And if you believe that revenge can whisper, not scream, I hope you'll subscribe. There are so many true stories waiting to be told, so many voices, just like mine, that deserve to be heard.